Welcome to episode 54 of the Filmumentaries podcast. If you're a new listener, welcome. Do be sure to listen back to some of the 53 episodes that came before this one. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back and apologies. Apologies because this episode is late. This should have been the second episode for June 2022, but due to work commitments, I wasn't able to finish editing. And then I came down with COVID. So I've been in bed for the past 3 days. Unfortunately, I missed the British Grand Prix. I did work the first 2 days, and then I came down with the dreaded. So I'm still in bed today, though I do have a bit more energy actually, but I'm still not quite the full ticket. So this will be a shorter than usual intro, recorded straight into my laptop mic, because I'm not moving anywhere. Rest assured, I will endeavour to get 3 episodes out this month, July 2022, to make up for the shortfall. So for those of you who are kindly donating via patreon.com/Jamie Benning, your dollars, pounds, pesos, they're not going to waste. Okay, so for this episode, I was put in touch with Hanna Barbera, Bluth Studios, and Disney artist and animator, a guy called T Dan Hofstedt. T Dan worked for Disney on a number of their big projects, including Aladdin, The Lion King, and Mulan. I had the pleasure of speaking to him in June 2022. One last thing, my mic recording got somehow trashed, so what you'll hear is the recording of my mic through Zoom rather than my normally separate recording. Hopefully it won't make a big difference. So here's my chat with T Dan Hofstedt, and I'll be back at the end for only a tiny bit more jabbering on. So Tidan, I understand your father worked for Disney. So how early were you exposed to the creative world, do you think?
My dad worked at Disneyland when I was a kid. He did caricatures and portraits, mostly caricatures at the amusement park in Anaheim. And so I grew up watching him draw, and we went to Disneyland very often when we were kids with free passes and discount passes and special events. So that was a treat to be able to be there in that era. And I remember on Main Street in Disneyland, they had a little shop, and at the time they had cells, animation cells stacked in this little, on this cupboard or a drawer, and you could just pick through them and say, oh, something from Sleeping Beauty or something from, 101 Dalmatians. Of course, back then they were only like $20 or $10, and as a kid, $10, oh, that's like 10 weeks of allowance. I would never be able to afford that. But of course, now today those would have been worth thousands of dollars. But and they had these little flip books where you could pick them up and see Donald Duck throwing a tantrum, or you'd see Mickey Mouse running, or Jiminy Cricket running. And I love the idea of animation, and I was so exposed to that. Although my dad wasn't an animator, he was an artist, but he was doing caricatures in the park there. And I determined at an early age that I wanted to be an animator, as early as age 8 or so. And so I was into it in those early days.
And what did you do to kind of set yourself on that path? We think about these days when people want to end up in film or animation, they go to film school, but I guess for you it wasn't as simple as that. Where did you go, and what did you do to reach your dream?
Well, starting from that seed planting of wanting to be an animator as a kid, and being exposed to Jungle Book and those films that I remember seeing when they were new in the 60s, and having that desire, I took kind of a detour because I got more into sports and I got into music as I went through my teenage years. And I learned caricatures from my dad, and I put myself, started earning money as early as 14, and I was able to buy a car and buy guitars, and so I didn't quite have my path set for animation. It was in the back of my mind yet. It wasn't until I got to college and I was interested in doing some kind of art. And I thought, well, illustration, maybe graphic design, maybe advertising. I wasn't really sure how I could apply the art at the time. And I took a design class wherein you could choose whatever medium you wanted. And most people use that class to sort of supplement their one-man show that they might do for their senior project or something. And so they do printmaking or, you know, sculpture or ceramics or whatever medium they wanted to concentrate on. But you had to pitch the idea to the class and the teacher what your project would be. And so I thought, you know, what would I do? What would I want to do? And then I decided, you know, I've always wanted to make an animated film. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do a cartoon, an animated film. And I pitched the idea, did my research and made little, you know, boards with illustrations and had my idea, little thumbnails for the storyboards. And so I thought, okay, this is how you do it. And my teacher, who was a very old school art and design teacher, very dignified gentleman. And he said, well, what do you want to prostitute your art and sell sugar to children on Saturday morning for? Wow. I mean, and he was serious. He thought animation was like the, you know, the unwanted stepchild or something of art. And I thought, no, but Fantasia and Sleeping Beauty and all these classics that were in my head. In fact, that year, or it might have even been right around that month, the re-release of Sleeping Beauty had happened. So, you know, Disney wasn't releasing everything all the time. It was sort of rotating. And so Sleeping Beauty was on the big screen, and I had gone to it, and I sat through it twice because I was just so, oh man, this is great, you know, on the big screen, and the power and the craftsmanship and the art and the color, and you know, it was really, really kind of reuniting my mind and heart with my childhood dream to say, okay, I really want to do this. This is kind of the rebirth of that seed that was planted. And so I kind of pitched that, you know, that it doesn't have to be, you know, selling sugar. It could be something that is meaningful and powerful and epic and classic. And he goes, well, all right, see what you can do with it. And so I just buried myself in it. I bought a little Super 8 camera that had a single frame feature, and I got a tripod, and I built myself a little light box. I'd gone to the library. There weren't many books on animation at the time, but I went to the library and found, you know, you need a light box. Okay, so I made this, and I didn't have the proper animation paper, so I just used regular typing paper or copier paper, and then 3-hole punched it, you know, just a three holes. And then I made 3 little dowels that were the size of those holes, spaced apart, to be the registration pegs. And, you know, I got into it and taught myself pretty much, but just, you know, looking at books and figuring this out, and shot my little film. And I was up till 2 and 3 in the morning every night, you know, doing this. And it just really caught my imagination, I guess you could say. So at the end of the semester, I presented my film. I got an A in the class, and the teacher, who had tried to dissuade me from it, he said, you know, I can really tell you're into this, but you know, we don't teach that here. But you might be interested in this. And he had cut out an article from the Sunday paper. It was a Sunday supplement. They had this thing called Parade magazine, which when you used to get the big Sunday paper with the comics and the ads and everything, there was always like a special feature, and they'd have, you know, little articles and things. And one article was about John Lasseter, who had just won his 2nd consecutive Student Academy Award for a short film that he had done, short animated film that he had done as a student at CalArts. And he said, if you're into animation, you got to check this out, because this is where it's happening. And I thought, okay, cool. And so I looked it up. I got the phone number. I called up and talked to Jack Hanna, who was the director of the program at the time, and he had been a director at Disney, had directed Donald Duck shorts and Chip and Dale and miscellaneous shorts through the 40s and 50s. And then he also directed some live action, and in fact he directed some live action segments for the Walt Disney Show, which was the weekly episodes that Walt Disney himself would host. And so Jack Hanna was shooting Walt Disney in those segments. He had a long career with Disney, and he retired, and now he was running the character animation program at CalArts. And so he was kind enough to take my call, and he said, well, I'd love to meet you. If you want to look at the school, come on up, And so long story short, I did end up going up there to visit him. I got there like 5 minutes before he was about to leave for the day. But he was kind enough to put his briefcase down, and he showed me his desk and his office, and then a couple of the rooms of the other of the classrooms. And then he showed me some sample portfolios. He goes, well, if you're serious about animation, you've got to be at least as good as these guys or better to get in, and it would, sketching at the zoo, figure drawing. Says, we don't want you to copy stuff, don't copy stuff from comic books or animation. We want you to observe life and see how things move and see how things are built and see how things are made. And says, put your best foot forward and good luck. And so that inspired me to want to go, and I could see the samples. I go, I got to be at least as good as that or better. And that kind of set a tone for my career in a way, because I was always surrounded by really, really talented people that I thought, wow, how do I belong in this room? And I mean, there's Glenn Keane over here and Eric Goldberg over here, and Mark Henn and all these giants of animation. And you really had to elevate your game in order to kind of keep up with them if you could. So I was very inspired by other artists.
Yeah, and how did you manage to end up working for Disney themselves then? Was that your first kind of assignment, or did you go to another animation house first?
Well, my first job out of CalArts was at Hanna Barbera, and worked on the TV show The Smurfs. And it was one of the last season or two of in-house animation for the Smurfs, because they were just starting to send stuff overseas to have them done. And
so this was like 84, 85 kind of time?
Yeah,
I would have been watching the Smurfs here in the UK. Yeah.
Right. I worked on several episodes, for about 4 or 5 months, and it was it's really quite interesting. And I kind of kick myself now. I wish I had taken the opportunity to speak to more of the veterans that were there. There was one fellow who was just down the hall from me, and I spoke to him a few times. His name was Lefty Callahan, and he was an old one of the original Flintstones animators, but also he had worked with MGM, the old Tom and Jerry's, and he was super nice guy. But I didn't want to bother him. I said, "Oh, hey Lefty, how you doing?" I did talk to him once or twice, but I wish I had picked his brain more. But they also had a lot of freelance artists who were veterans of the old Warner Brothers shorts, like Ken Harris, and he even went back all the way to an old gentleman by the name of Hugh Fraser, who has a credit on Snow White as an animator. So a lot of these veterans who were coming to the Smurfs to pick up their weekly stack of stuff, and you would see them outside the director's office on a Monday, and then you'd see them again outside the director's office on a Friday. I just wish I had picked their brains a little bit more. But
why were those veterans working? Why were those veterans working there? Is that because the big studios like Disney and so on are kind of not been turning out so much animation at that time?
Yeah, it was in that um, transition period, I guess you'd say, where um, the Disney renaissance, if you want to call it that, hadn't really happened yet. You know, Don Bluth had left Disney, and there was kind of this growth period where they weren't really sure if they're going to keep making animation. Animation was expensive. They had done Black Cauldron, and it wasn't well received. And there was a lot of and the old timers were retiring and passing away, and they weren't making that many. And then plus the shorts in that era were kind of dying as well. The heyday of the shorts in American cinema, and I'm sure it's probably the same in Britain, where like the 50s and 60s, you would see a short with maybe a newsreel, and then the previews, and then there might be a short subject, and then you'd have the feature presentation. But as cinemas would say, hey, we're not going to waste all that time. We want bodies in the seats. We're just going to show the features. And so they started cutting out all of those extra fillers. And so the heyday of the shorts had already died by the early 80s. And all these great animators from the 40s and 50s who did these wonderful Oscar-winning things, like the Duck Amuck and What's Opera Doc, and all these great little shorts that are classic today. You could watch those and definitely be charmed by them. Those guys, they weren't finding work, and if they were finding work, it was on like basic stuff that was like, okay, yeah, we'll just knock this out. And it wasn't as epic as it maybe used to be. And maybe I'm romanticizing it a little bit, I don't know, but that was sort of the feeling at that time, that it was summed up by a quote, and I didn't hear it myself, but I've heard it quoted, and that was Ward Kimball, who was one of the illustrious 9 old men from the Disney stable of artists. He says, Walt died and you missed it. And that was sort of summing up that the magic period where there's this energy in animation of growth and invention and all these things that we call classics today. These guys were making it up. It wasn't like they were mining things for the way they do today. They'll just kind of take their established titles and sort of repurpose them over and over again. I mean, these guys are making it up, which is really, to me, the impressive thing, that it was invention and vision and collaboration and putting people with talent at the right time to develop these things. And that to me is fascinating when you get to hear those stories.
So what were the circumstances that led to you working for Don Bluth, who'd left Disney and created his own studio over in Ireland, wasn't it, I think?
Yes. He ended up moving to Ireland, although he had already created his own studio. So how I got to Bluth, it's kind of I guess a circuitous, yeah, that word, circuitous. Route, because I was aware of Don Bluth as early as 1979 when Secret of Nim came out. And that was, oh, wow, that is really great. This is what Disney should be doing. And then I started hearing and reading about it, and oh, this guy left Disney, and he was at Disney, and he was, I mean, in a nutshell, it's all out there. It's not like I'm repeating anything that can't be found, but that was my awareness of Don coming into his own, and he was sort of carrying the torch for animation. Of course, Disney was kind of in a shaky period at that time, as we talked about. And so I thought, wow, if I want to do animation, it's either got to be Disney or Don Bluth, because he's doing it. And so he was on my radar, and I applied to work at Don Bluth, when they were starting to do the video games. They did Space Ace,
Dragon's Lair, and yeah,
yeah, Dragon's Lair was the first one, right?
yeah, I remember them very well. Amazing for the time. I think it blew everyone's mind that you could do that in a
Right.
computer. Yeah.
And a couple of my classmates from CalArts were already working at Don Bluth on the games, and I thought, oh, hey, yeah, I could join them. So around 1980, I guess, maybe, yeah, I guess it had to be 80 or maybe early 81, but it was when I was still getting ready to go to CalArts. I applied at Don Bluth. I was given an in-between test, and I was totally green. I mean, I thought, okay, I made my own little film, but it wasn't anything like this. It was, so I suppose my line was a little shaky. Maybe my inexperience showed, but the person that administered the test, Vera Lanfer, who was the head of cleanup, she was very encouraging and says, well, why don't you keep practicing and try again later, and it's like, okay. So I was a little dejected, but I thought, okay, and I'll keep trying. And a few months later I did, and kind of the same result. And by that time I was in CalArts, and I thought, okay, I've got to kind of stick with this school thing, I've got a lot to learn. So I was kind of on their radar. And then one kind of turning point was I went for, this might have been my second time. I went to drop my portfolio off thinking that, okay, I've progressed. And I went down to their studio, which was at the time in Studio City in Southern California. It was behind a bank, but it was just this kind of office space. And I dropped my portfolio off, and I met with, I asked, can I talk to Don Bluth? As well, he's in a meeting right now, but so I talked to one of their associate producers, a guy named Mel Griffin, and he looked at my portfolio and he kind of said, yeah, not bad. I said, yeah, have you thought about going to the zoo more? He says, oh yeah, I've been there. I said, well, you should go more, because we'd like to see more figure drawing and animals in action. And so that was about 9:30 in the morning one day. And so I went to Aaron Brothers Art Mart, which has art supplies, got a blank sketchbook, and I went straight to the LA Zoo, and I stayed at the zoo the whole day, and filled that thing with sketches. I was using a pencil and a Sharpie, trying different pens, and I just sketched every page. And then I went back that very same day, got there at about 5:30, and I asked if I could see Mel Griffin again, and he came out and he goes, oh, you're back. What's happening? So yeah, if you don't mind, could I put this in with my portfolio if it's not too late? And he goes, oh, let me see. And he flipped through and he goes, when'd you do these? He goes, today. And I go, yeah, cool, all right. And so he took that and he put it, and I saw where my portfolio was in the office, and he put it with my portfolio from one side of the room, but then he put it onto the other side of the room. And I don't know for this for sure, but in my mind, that meant from not a chance over here to maybe worth a look over here. So now fast forward, how did I end up at Bluth? So this was maybe like 82, probably 81, 82. And I got out of CalArts in 84, and then worked at Hanna Barbera, and then at a special effects place called Apogee, which was John Dykstra, and but it was sort of the offshoot of the Lucas group that had gone north, and so the people that stayed south, the John Dykstra group, became Apogee. And I worked in the special effects, which was basically tracing roto mats. We were doing mats for practical effects, and there was like bolts of lightning and swirling effects that had to be occluded with vehicles and characters and things. And so that was my job. But while I was there was this gal upstairs who was helping paint the mats. Some of them were done on cells. Then we would mark them out, and then they would fill in with black to make the mats. And she had done some cell painting for Bluth. And, just getting to know each other, the whole team, and knowing that she had worked at Bluth is, oh, wow. So what's it like to work there? And she knew I was wanting to be an animator and everything. And she said, well, they're starting this mouse movie, a Spielberg thing. You should apply again. And at that time, I wasn't sure. Yeah, I tried like 3 times, but okay, I'll give it another try. And they were right down the street, actually. This was in Van Nuys now. And their studio was no longer in Studio City, but it was now in Van Nuys, and it was just 2 blocks away from Apogee. So I walked down there at lunch and dropped my new portfolio off. And a couple of weeks later, I was trying to apply because Apogee was winding down, it was going to end, and I was applying to go to Filmation, which was a Saturday morning place. They did He-Man and all this, and I had taken the He-Man test. I hadn't heard from Bluth. I'm thinking, okay, I got to do something. This is coming to an end. So I took the He-Man test and was dropping it off at the He-Man lobby, or the Filmation lobby, and I left it with the lady at the desk, and she goes, oh, you're Dan Hofstedt? And he goes, yes. Well, you have a message from your wife. She called down here. And I thought, what? And I thought, oh, now I'm worried, okay, one of the kids is hurt, or, something serious happened, or, so I went to a phone booth well before cell phones, kids, went to a phone booth to call her up. And I said, what's happening? What's going on? She goes, oh, did you drop your test off? And I go, yeah. Oh, well, Don Bluth called you. They want you to start Monday. I go, what? Yeah, here's their number. Call them up. And I go, okay. So, I called them up, and they say, yeah, come on down, and we'd like to see you. We'd like to talk to you. Okay, so I went there the next day, and was in their little lobby, and met with the receptionist, and she was, okay, just a minute, and she made a call, and then I hear these footsteps, boom, 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 coming down the stairs, and bursting through the door is John Pomeroy. And I knew him from the articles, but I'd never met him. And he goes, are you Dan Hofstedt? I go, yeah, come with me. And I followed him up the stairs. I'm thinking, what's happening? And we sat down in his office. He goes, we've had our eye on you. He says, you're the guy that went to the zoo that day. Huh. And I go, yeah. He says, we like people who show initiative and the desire to work here. And we've watched your progress, and I think you're ready. How'd you like to be my assistant? Yeah, let's do it. And then the details got worked out, and I started working as his assistant, and that to me was the most fortunate, I guess, opportunity I could ever have, because John was one of the premier animators of that generation. I mean, he was tutored by the 9 old men. Eric Larson and Frank and Ollie were still at the studio when they were there. And he was like the golden boy, like a young, prolific, great draftsman. He was really, really great, and very prolific. I said, well, I do want to be an animator someday. And he goes, well, if you can keep up with me and your assignments, which meant assisting, breakdowns and in-betweens, and just following up his work and making sure it's complete. If you can keep up with me, you can do your own scenes on the side.
Oh, wow. And this was for An American Tail, was it, at this point?
For American Tail, yeah. I was on at the very beginning of American Tail as John's assistant, and it was a great learning opportunity. And he was strict. He was tough. I mean, if I had a hand out of arc, or if a nose wobbled, or if the blink wasn't just right, he'd make me go back and do it again. He goes, this is not cutting it. And he did kind of cut me deep one time when, maybe I just wasn't seeing it, or was hurrying, or whatever. He goes, my having to go over these with this level of scrutiny sort of negates the need for you to be here, doesn't it? And that was very early. It was sort of like lighting a fire, like, hey, pay attention, do it better. This matters. You know, maybe on the small screen it wouldn't matter, but on the big screen, people are going to see this. So it's got to be steady. You know, so it was that level of scrutinization and attention to detail that made me elevate my game, I guess you could say, just to try to keep up. As I mentioned before, you know, you're surrounded by these talented people, and you don't want to stick out as the weak link. So you had to definitely rise to the occasion, and that was a great learning experience. And he taught me so much about timing, about drawing, about character and personality, and it was the best apprenticeship, I guess you could say, that I could have asked for.
Yeah, I when I think of John Pomeroy, I think of Pete's Dragon, and I think, you know, the character animation in that. Just there's a thing that you guys managed to do in the 80s, which I think if you look at today's computer animation, maybe not computer animation, maybe I'm talking more about visual effects, is that you managed to convey gravity and the effects of gravity on a character that I don't think people are capable of doing in computer generated things. I mean, I think immediately of something like The Hobbit. You know, there was a scene with Legolas running up some steps as they were falling or something, and you don't buy it. You just don't buy it. Whereas I look at films like, you know, Pete's Dragon that he worked on, and I look at All Dogs Go to Heaven or American Tail, things that you worked on, and they have a heft to them, they have a weight to them. How do you go about kind of managing to convey that to the audience? Like, what do you study? I mean, how do you get to that point?
Well, I believe that it comes from observation first, of, you know, seeing things around you, but also feeling it within yourself. You know, you could just the awareness that everything, there's a balance and a weight to things. And that's one of the things I see that lacks in a lot of the, I guess you could call it Saturday morning style animation, is there's no awareness of weight and balance. And so the weight, to me, is generated by knowing that if, like, let's say a character is standing on two legs and then he lifts a leg up, well, you can't just lift your leg up and stay in the same place. You have to do one of two things. You either have to shift over to the leg that you're about to put the weight on and then lift, or you tip the direction you want to start going and then lift your leg that needs to catch you before you fall. So those two facts of knowing that, okay, if you're standing there static, even though you're not moving, you still have weight, you still have balance. And so you have to detect, well, okay, are they standing equally on both legs, or are they favoring one leg or the other? Is there a twist to the body? So you look for these kind of naturally occurring things that we take for granted, but the animator has to kind of look inside of it to know what it is, so that you can depict it in the drawing, so that the audience can identify it. I mean, the average person just looking at something, you know, isn't detecting that, but an animator is, so that they can, you know, capture that and make it convincing on screen, and then the audience will accept it because it feels true. So, you know, when you talk about weight, to me, it begins with that, and it also, something John Pomeroy said when animating a walk, you know, all a walk is a series of falling and catching. If you're walking forward, if you didn't put that leg out in front of you to catch you, you would fall on your face. So it's a series of being in balance, out of balance, in balance, out of balance, in balance, out of balance. And there's kind of a rhythm to it that is picked up by, you know, where are the hips? How far are you rising up and down? And those up and downs and the rising and falling conveys the illusion or dimension of weight so that the audience can accept it. And so, yeah, it feels natural. They're not thinking about it, but they're feeling it. They're thinking, oh, that guy's in a hurry. He's worried about something, so he's in a hurry. Or he's scared. He's trying to get away from something. So they're not analyzing why there's weight. They just accept that it feels right, and they're just caring about the character in their predicament at the moment. And when that happens, then the animator has done their job. That you've sort of suspended their belief, or suspended their disbelief rather, to just help tell the story and do it in a way that doesn't take them out of it. Because if you make something that has no weight to it and it looks false, the audience will feel uneasy, like, well, that looked weird, you know, he looks like he's just floating or whatever. It just feels false. So, you know, to me, the animator has to kind of understand what makes this action or this character look true in terms of believability, not necessarily realistic believability, but just knowing that it looks right, so that you don't even worry about it. And all you're worried about is what is happening in the story at that moment and carries you on to the next thing.
Yeah, it has to adhere to the rules of that world that they're in, doesn't it? Because otherwise, like you say, it's a jarring moment for the audience. So you did those films with Don Bluth Studios, and then you did end up at Disney. What was the circumstances that got you there?
Well, at Bluth, we worked on American Tail, and then about halfway through the making of American Tail, we started hearing rumors that, oh, we might be moving to Ireland, and they've got a deal with the Irish government. It was the IDA, the Irish Development Agency, I believe it was, or administration or something like that. And they were trying to bring in businesses to help grow industries and train workers. And I mean, it could have been any sort of industry, whether it was manufacturing or, you know, whatever, but it happened to be animation for us, that a deal was struck. And I don't know the structure of it, of course, but, you know, basically, hey, come over here and we'll give you some money. And if you make films here and train our people, you know, everybody will be happy. So that we started hearing about that in midway through, and by the end of it, we were training Irish artists. We got a dozen at first, and I trained most of them that were going to go or wanting to be in animation, how to flip, how to in between. So you know, I was the rough in between supervisor, basically like a trainer for the new Irish artists who were just learning to do in-between tests, which were, you know, kind of full circle, because it wasn't that many years before that, you know, I was taking my own in-between tests, and my journey got me into it. So here I was, John's assistant, and I was trying to animate on the side, and then I was given this opportunity and obligation to, you know, help train the Irish artists. And so that brought us to Ireland. And fast forward through that, you know, we did American Tail, Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven. We started Rock-a-Doodle. During the making of Rock-a-Doodle, by that time, several of the American artists who had gone to Ireland and said, okay, I'll do a year, maybe I'll do two. And then, but, you know, then I'll want to come home. You know, a few of them had already gone home. And of course, Don and John and Gary, they did not want to lose the talent. They thought, okay, why don't we make a satellite group? So enough people had gone, and then John decided to also go back to the States. So he was sort of the head of that satellite unit. And so it got in the back of my mind. I said, you know, I might want to go home too. You know, I mean, you know, my family's here, my wife's family's here. And, you know, we've had 3.5 good years in Ireland, lots of good memories. My son was born over there, but I think it's time to go home. So that was my mindset, that I was going to go back to Ireland. But right around that time, before I got back to California, Disney had put an ad in an Irish paper. It was a half-page ad, and it says, Disney is looking for animation talent. Of course, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure out who that ad was aimed at. And I was thinking, you know, I've always wanted to work for Disney, and I'd like to see what they have to say, you know. And so I made an appointment, and I was kind of nervous because by that time I was a directing animator, which meant basically you're like a lead animator. You might be given a segment, and then you might have 2 or 3 junior animators under you to help you, and you know, help mentor them and train them. So so I was a directing animator, so I felt, you know, I don't want Don to find out that I'm you know, going to talk to these guys. And so I asked, you know, when I called the number, I said, would it be okay if I'm like the last of the day? You know, I didn't want to run into anybody. I was kind of nervous, you know, because Don and John, they gave me opportunities, and, you know, I didn't want to make them mad and whatever, but I wanted to find out. And so I got my appointment. It was at a hotel there. I went up, and there was a gentleman by the name of Bill Dennis, who was sort of like the head of HR or hiring or recruiting or something. And then there was Andreas Deja, who was a very gifted German animator who came to the States and at a young age, and was now one of the top Disney animators. So the two of them were on a European trip, and they were going to a book fair in Germany. And they were being featured in some kind of booth or books or whatever. Anyway, so they were on their way, and they thought, okay, let's stop and recruit in Dublin. So I got my appointment and went up there, and I didn't really have a portfolio gathered, but I had Xeroxed some of my shots just for reference for myself. You know, if I animated a shot, I would Xerox it, so I'd have my own little flip book. I might say, okay, here's how I did a Fievel walk, or maybe Charlie the dog was walking or whatever. And so I had this stack of reference of flip books. So I brought that as my portfolio. I had 7 or 8 of these flip books. And I went to talk to them, and I gave it to Andreas, and he was flipping through them and said, oh, these are great. Oh, you'd have no problem at Disney. You'd fit right in. And I honestly was choked up, and I was just about, you know, holding back tears, because I thought, really? You know, I mean, because you gotta at that time, you know, I'd only been animating a couple of years, really. You know, I'd been John's assistant, and, you know, maybe 5 years, five or 6 years. And, you know, I'd risen through the ranks, and I felt, okay, I've had success here, but I felt like sort of like not quite a big fish in a little pond, but, you know, sort of like, okay, I was rising up the ranks, directing animator, and I thought, but I still didn't think I had proven myself totally to be, you know, counted among, you know, the great animators or whatever. But so I felt, just hearing that from one of their best animators just really touched me. And I thought, man, that gave me a lot of encouragement. But, you know, leaving that, I thought, well, you know, Don's given me a lot of opportunities, and you know, I love John, and he taught me a lot. I don't want to really leave them. I think I'd rather see what I could do. But that fact that they had liked my work made me really, really confident. And so, you know, I did move back to California, was at the California Satellite Studio with John, and we were working on Troll in Central Park. And to be honest, I think John would agree, that story just was just convoluted and not entertaining, and we were trying to get gags and ideas into it, and it just was not the greatest movie. And it was very discouraging because, you know, Disney had come out with Little Mermaid a couple years before, and you know, they were doing some amazing stuff, and I was starting to feel discouraged. I thought, man, it's sort of like the script had flipped, where in the beginning, Bluth was up here and Disney was kind of wavering. And now Disney had been awakened, and a lot of their talent had kind of risen to the occasion and grown, and now they were doing some amazing things. And the Bluth stories were kind of not as inspiring, and it was kind of discouraging. And so I called the number after about 4 or 5 months of trying to make it work and feeling frustrated and sad. I called the number and I said, hey, if you're still interested, I'd really like to look into coming and join you guys. And he goes, yeah. And I went to talk to Bill Dennis. I met with John Musker and Ron Clements, who at that time were starting to direct Aladdin. Of course, they had done the Sherlock Holmes mouse movie, Great Mouse Detective.
Mouse Detective, yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, I knew who they were, but I'd never met them. And so they interviewed me, and I showed them my stuff, and they said, well, yeah, we'd certainly like to have you. And so I was the second animator hired on Aladdin. The first one was Eric Goldberg, and he was developing the genie. Everyone else in the animation group was busy finishing Beauty and the Beast. So it was a great opportunity, timing wise, for me to kind of be there at the beginning of Aladdin. And I was helping develop some incidental characters, you know, some background characters. And then I was given this little humble thief, Gazim, the humble thief, who gets swallowed up by the cave in the beginning of the movie. And that was the first sequence to go into production, because they were still rewriting Aladdin's part, because they had a whole turnover of the story, where Aladdin started out as kind of like a 10 or 11-year-old kid, and then he progressed through the development. Now he's more like a Tom Cruise teenage type, more mature. So while they were fixing all that, they said, okay, we can at least do this sequence. We know we've got to have this desert thing with the cave and this thief guy. So why don't you do that? So that was great timing. I didn't have to, you know, I wasn't really competing with the other people on the Beauty and the Beast, because they were busy. So I was given this opportunity, which was a real blessing, you know, that I can do this small character myself. And so I'm very, very grateful that I was able to do that, rather than kind of get thrown in to the pool. You know, maybe there would have been some doubt as to whether I'd be given that opportunity, because I hadn't been there that long.
You arrived, it seems, right in that kind of Disney Renaissance, really, where they'd gone through that kind of lull period, as you say, as Bluth Studios and other studios were rising up, and then the success of Little Mermaid at the end of the 80s, and arriving right for Aladdin. I mean, that was a huge film. I remember that just being kind of ubiquitous when I don't know how old would I, but what year was that? 92. Yeah, so I would have been in my teens by now. I just remember it being everywhere. It was the biggest movie out that year by far. You must, I mean, your feet never touched the ground, I guess. You just kind of were straight in and working on the biggest movie.
Yeah, I mean, I equate it to being, I guess, in the right place at the right time, but also being prepared, almost like a wave. You know, I grew up on the Southern California coast through my childhood, and then I went to high school in Hawaii. So I spent about 7 years in Hawaii. And so the imagery of waves and surfing and ocean is very strong in me. And I often look at my animation career as almost like waves, where I kind of was waiting for a wave, and I caught the wave, and I, you know, rode it, and it was great. So, you know, getting to work at Bluth, that was a wave. It was like, hey, they're the kind of up and coming, and I'm given the opportunity to work with them and learn and grow, and I mean, the whole animation industry owes a lot to Don Bluth to kind of, for that reason, you know, not only for myself, but so many other artists who were given those opportunities. And then that wave kind of died out. And then I was right at that wave at Disney. And I was able to ride that for a good 12 years. I was there from 91 to 2002, I think. You know, worked on several features during that time. And so that wave, and then, you know, that wave started to kind of flatten out a bit. And then the CG opportunity came. I stepped my foot into the CG waters at the end of Treasure Planet, where I helped develop Ben the robot, you know, with some hand-drawn tests, trying to figure out mouth shapes and things. So I would do drawings and then hand them over to the people developing the rigs and the model. And as in that process, I was looking over the shoulder of the animator who was doing those early tests. And I go, man, this looks really fun. And he made it look easy. You know, he was just click, click, click. Oh, you just do this, you do this, you know. and I thought, man, that looks great. So I started taking, you know, some tutorials on how to do CG. And I was given Mr. Arrow, who is one of the secondary characters in Treasure Planet, and he's hand-drawn. So I was given that character to do, and I, you know, was able to do that. And then at the tail end, I was begging Ron and John, because I now got my feet wet with CG, and says, hey, can I work on Ben the robot? You know, I helped develop him, and I want to learn CG. And they go, well, you know, we've got enough people, and you know, I'm not really sure that's going to work out. And, you know, we need you to kind of help finish the 2D stuff. And so I was kind of bugging them. Well, lo and behold, we had a screening midway through, and Martin Short was doing the voice of the robot. And everybody loved it. And he goes, oh, we got to write more robot stuff. You know, those gags were funny. So they, in the final sequence, they started writing more parts for the robot. And then they came back to me and said, well, turns out we might not have enough people to finish the robot thing. Are you still want to do it? I go, heck yeah. So I got kind of a crash course in their rig, which was more complex than any rig I had worked on before, as far as my, you know, little practice scenes. I was able to finish that film, and I animated 4 shots, woohoo, of Ben the robot in the film. And you know, that was kind of the beginning of my CG career, but it was also kind of the end of my Disney career, because, you know, they were kind of doing less 2D, and they were kind of gearing up some 3D, and there's big layoffs. And I didn't really have as much CG as apparently they wanted to see on, you know, for the next feature. So I didn't quite make the cut, you know, so I thought, okay.
But that wave of CG must have been sort of, you know, chasing you for quite some time. It was, what was it? It was The Great Mouse Detective, I think, was one of the first animation movies to have CG, and then The Lion King had all that flocking stuff with the stampede. Right. So right. You this was on your horizon for a while, I guess. Did you feel like, you know, a difficulty in having a foot in both camps, as it were, or you know, staying in traditional animation, but knowing that it could kind of come crashing in for you?
I was interested in it not as a necessity. I mean, a lot of my colleagues in the 2D world felt, oh man, I got to learn this 3D or else I'm out of a job. I looked at it more like, oh, that looks fun. I'd like to try that. I want to do it. And you rightly point out that I had been exposed to it a little bit. You know, even with the Gazim, the Humble Thief, he was interacting with this CG kind of a tiger's head element, the Cave of Wonders. And so that was animated. I didn't animate it, but you know, they would animate it, and then they'd print out the wireframe version of those cells or those frames, upon which I would draw over. So I knew where my footfalls had to be. If he's climbing over the teeth, or he's walking on the ground plane, that was computer generated. So I knew, you know, the footfalls were on this grid. So I would map out the footfalls as he's walking up, approaching the so I was exposed to it and fascinated by it. And I thought, well, that's cool. I want to do this someday and make it part of my repertoire. But as it turned out, shortly after leaving Disney, I was hired at Sony, and I was hired to work on Polar Express, and then I was co-animation supervisor on Monster House, both of which used mocap. So I was kind of another kind of mini wave, I guess you could say, where I was given that opportunity. I rolled up my sleeves and I tried to learn as much as I can, and you know, I really appreciated my 4 years at Sony, because I met a lot of really talented CG artists that taught me a lot. And since then, you know, I've kind of gone back and forth between 2D and 3D. And even now I'm at Warner Brothers and I'm working on a TV show that is mostly 2D, but we do have some 3D elements that get entered in. And so I appreciate that I have a little bit of both and can kind of swing back and forth as needed.
Yeah. What shows that? Is that the Green Eggs and Ham?
Yeah, I finished Green Eggs and Ham, season 1 and season 2, and now I'm on Animaniacs, which is
it's back. I didn't know it was back.
it is. Yeah, it's on Hulu. We're on a 3rd season. The first 2 seasons are out on Hulu, and that's largely 2D, but you know, the occasional 3D element is in there.
I guess one of the things that, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, one of the things that doing it in CG affords you is that you can have a sort of, you can be cohesive across multiple animators doing it. But something that's always fascinated me about the traditional way of doing it, let's pick, say, Simba or someone like that, one of the characters that you animated in The Lion King. How do you ensure that it's a cohesive character while still having room to allow you to put in little flourishes and things of, you know, your own personality in there? How does that come about? Is that an animation supervisor's job?
In the model of the Simba example that you gave, so the lead animator of young Simba was Mark Henn, and he's one of the great animators of Disney Renaissance, and very, very gifted and talented guy. And so I was in the young Simba unit, and he would set the standard, so to speak. I often equated it to like an actor who is playing the part, and then you show up on a Saturday matinee. Well, today that part is being played by, you know, and the understudy is playing. So so this other actor now is taking over this role. Of course, you can't be exactly that actor, but you still have to make that character consistent with the way it's written, the way the audience expects to see it, the way the makeup and all of that, you know. So I equate it with that, where as an animator, you want to try and match what the lead animator is doing, just for consistency's sake. And you know, the first most obvious way to do that is have the model sheets and other samples of previously approved work surrounding you. You might have it plastered all around your desk. You might even have it laid down underneath the drawings you're doing, so you can kind of lift your drawing up and peek underneath and say, oh, okay, I got to make sure that the eyes don't drift too far apart, or I keep the eyes the right size, or you know, the ears are fixed a little higher on the head, I'm starting to draw them a little too low on the head, or whatever. So you try to keep yourself true based on this reference you would have, starting with the model sheet and other examples. And then as far as putting your own spin on it, you know, putting your take, you know, the way you would do it, as long as it's consistent with the character to begin with, consistent with the moment in the film, then it's pretty much, I think their directors appreciate not having to think of everything. You know, they want the animators to bring something to it as long as it fits. You know, hey, surprise me, you know. But sometimes people get overzealous and start to do flourishes and things that just don't fit, and whoa, wait, no, Simba wouldn't do that. You know, no, that's, you've gone too far here. You know, so it's great to bring inventive things in, but you know, you have to kind of keep it within the parameters of what they would do. You know, I'm reminded of one little shot of Simba and Nala that I did. And in the foreground, you have Zazu, the hornbill, is pontificating. And Ellen Woodbury animated Zazu, but I animated the two lions. And he's pontificating, and they kind of roll their eyes and look at each other. And then it wasn't scripted or wasn't in the boards, but I thought, well, this is what a kid would do. And I have him mouthing blah, blah, blah. You know, even though he's not saying it, he's not vocalizing it. You can read his lips. His lips are together, and then, you know, he's just blah, blah, blah. And I threw that in there thinking, oh, they're not going to like that. And then showed it, and then yeah, hey, cute, yeah, that's what a kid would do, you know. and so those little moments of you feel it and you go, hey, let me try this, and hey, if it doesn't work, then that's fine. Another example of that, if you don't mind, is on Mulan. I did the emperor character, and he's you know, got some juicy little acting moments, but he's not really a main character, but he's got some pivotal acting in there. And the way it was boarded at the end, where, you know, he gives a little speech. He goes, "A flower that blooms in adversity is the most rare and beautiful of them all. Sir, you don't meet a girl like that every dynasty." And so it's the kind of conclusion, the last time you see the emperor, and it's sending the captain off to go get the girl. The way it was boarded, he didn't have his hat on. If you remember the film, when he's in his regalia, he's got this kind of box hat with this you know, this mortarboard kind of thing on the top.
Yeah.
And you know, he's very regal looking. And then during the chase scene, he's held captive and his hat gets knocked off. And that became a story point because the heroes kind of see, oh no, they've got the emperor, because the hat had been knocked off. And so you get to my shot of him telling the captain to go get the girl. The way it was boarded, there was no hat. And I thought, I need something for him to do with his hands, you know. But what is he going to do? I mean, he have his arms folded, hands to the side? You know, it's one of the challenges of, I guess, any actor or animation. What do you do with your hands? And I thought, well, why doesn't he hold his hat, and then he'll put his hat on his head at the end to kind of, okay, now it's back to normal. We're going to clean up this place. I'm back to being emperor. You go and live happily ever after. So I blocked it out. You know, I had him come in and he's carrying his hands, and then he gestures with the other hand. And then he turns, and then for an accent, you don't meet a girl like that every dynasty. And he puts his hat on his head, and then he turns and walks away. And I blocked it out like that. And I showed the directors, and they're going, yeah, that works. Let's see this let's see this pose for a few more frames, and you know, add a blink over here. You know, he gave me some directions and said, oh, wait, let me check the boards. And they went and looked at the boards. He goes, oh, wait, no, he doesn't have his hat here. Yeah, and then I thought, oh no, okay. But I said, well, the way I felt it, and I explained to them what I just told you, that I felt like he needed to put his hat back on to crown himself king again, and then, you know, now it'll go back and back to normal. And they kind of shook their head and like, okay, well, let's cut it in and see how it plays. And they had a screening coming up, because they would have periodic screenings of, you know, just to see how everything's fitting. And so there was, I guess, a deadline coming up. Well, all right, let's cut it in and see how it goes. And so they did. And then, you know, I was kind of like nervous. Oh, shoot, I got to figure out what to do with his hands now. And, you know, I thought it worked and everything. And so I sweated it out for a couple of days. And then the screening happened, and then I didn't hear anything. And I go up to the directors and go, so what's the verdict on the hat? She goes, oh yeah, no, it worked. Let's go with it. Oh, cool. So, you know, that was another example of bringing something to it that you feel in your mind and heart as an actor with a pencil, and having a reason for it, and then, you know, if it works, then, you know, it has a chance of being in. And so
That's cool. I mean, I often wonder, like, and forgive my ignorance here. So you've got the voice track from Jonathan Taylor Thomas or Jet Li in the case of Mulan. Do you ever get video of them as well, or are you purely working off the audio?
yeah, sometimes they would. Sometimes the actors didn't want that.
Right.
They would think, yeah, no, you're just getting the voice, you know.
Mm.
But, you know, I'd say the majority of the time they allowed it, and they would have it in there. And um, I found it really helpful, not so much to copy it exactly frame by frame, but just to kind of see the mannerisms that they might do even in between the words.
Mm.
You know, as an example, Billy Connolly, the Scottish comedian, did a voice for Pocahontas, one of the sailors in Pocahontas.
Yes.
So, you know, again, I was given kind of a minor character, but it was fun. You know, I didn't mind. I love doing those kind of, you know, secondary people, trying to put the life in so that they felt like or I felt like they belonged in the movie. You know, they're not just throwaway characters. So we filmed Billy Connolly, and when he would get revved up, he was kind of bombastic in his delivery, you know, and you know, and he would kind of wind up. He would, boy, you know, you could see his body and his mouth and everything kind of lead up to that burst of, what are you doing? You know, and it wasn't just the words itself. It was what preceded the words of him maybe shaking his head, tilting his head, bulging his cheeks, whatever it happened to be that was part of his delivery. You know, it inspired me to kind of try to find moments to put that. And that's one of the rules I try to live by in animating dialogue. And I tell my, you know, younger animators, because a lot of times you're animating between the lines. You're not just animating the mouth shapes and here's an O and here's an A, here's an S. You're animating emotions. And, you know, emotions are more important than the syllables. And, you know, Billy Connolly's delivery in those examples, he was full of energy and bursting with these, you know, what are you doing? You know, it's just like bursts of energy. And so you try to capture that, again, not frame by frame copying, but just feeling like, okay, how can I get that feeling into my art, into the drawings.
And then you buy it more as a viewer, I'm sure. You know, it had some credence to the way those lines are delivered. Yeah, I could talk to you for a very long time, T Dan. But one question I want to ask, and I ask this sometimes on my podcast, is that, you know, some of us are lucky enough to have created work that touches somebody or motivates them, but you've worked on some pretty seismic films. I mean, they're films that kind of defined a generation. They defined the industry at that time. Do you actually allow yourself to have pride in the work that you've done? I know you're somebody who's still working and still, you know, striving for new things. But do you give yourself time to kind of take pride in what you've done?
Oh, I do, and it mainly comes from my children and grandchildren. You know, I've got 3 kids and 7 grandkids, and you know, when I'm able to sit with some of them or one of them, just watching something, whether it's, you know, a Disney film or, you know, even if it's one of the Lego things I worked on, you know, it's satisfying because they'll say, "Oh, did you do this part, or what part did you do?" You know, and I'm gratified that they like it and they're proud of it, and that it's something that they can watch. It's something that they can enjoy. You know, I don't have to, you know, that's one of the reasons I got into animation, was to make, you know, family-based, you know, uplifting entertainment that my kids and grandkids could enjoy. And, you know, I feel like on that level, I've succeeded, and I'm very satisfied in that respect. But at the same time, I feel there's more things I would like to do and accomplish. And as I tell my students and younger animators, there's always stuff to learn. Every character, every film is different, and you just be open to the inspiration and do your best.
Perfect. That was a really nice way to end that. Thanks, Tidan. That was really enjoyable.
I appreciate the time, and thanks for asking me. It's an honor to be part of it.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with T Dan Hofstedt there. Thanks to T Dan for his time, and to Johnny B, aka Agrapha FX. That's AGRAPHAFX on Twitter. Do follow Johnny. He always posts fascinating things about effects history, and he's a top guy. He's put me in touch with a bunch of people since starting this podcast. Thanks again, Johnny. Thanks again, Dan. Next episode will be number 55, my conversation with film composer Daniel Pemberton. Yes, we finally met up and we did the interview in a park, and what a great guy he is too. I really felt like I was in the presence of a genius, a mad genius. Dan and I had a great chat, which I'm sure you're going to love, so stay tuned, or whatever the podcast equivalent is of that. I'm going for a nap now. Take care. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.